The phone vibrated across Grant Mitchell's polished mahogany desk 3 times before it caught his attention. He glanced at the device, a frown tugging at his features as the call disrupted his focus on the mountain of quarterly reports before him. The hour was late, nearly midnight, and the lights of the New York skyline flickered through the vast windows of his corner office. As the CEO of Mitchell Enterprises, every moment of his day was accounted for, especially with the highly anticipated merger announcement scheduled for tomorrow morning. The unfamiliar number on the caller ID gave him pause. For a split second, he considered letting it go, but something, perhaps a gut feeling, urged him to answer. "Grant Mitchell speaking," he said, his voice the embodiment of calm authority, a tone he had perfected over the years. "Mr. Mitchell." The voice on the other end was steady and professional, with an undertone of urgency. "This is Nurse Rodriguez from Manhattan General Hospital. I'm calling about Emma Caldwell. You're listed as her sole emergency contact." Grant's grip on the phone tightened. Emma Caldwell, his executive assistant for the last 2 years, was an integral part of his life, smart, efficient, and utterly reliable. She always arrived before anyone else and was often the last to leave the office. But today, she hadn't shown up, something he could hardly recall ever happening. What happened? His voice carried a tinge of concern as he stood and grabbed his suit jacket from the back of the chair. She was brought in after collapsing at her apartment. Her neighbor called 911. She's stable for now, but unconscious. Doctors are running tests. There was a pause before Nurse Rodriguez spoke again. "Sir, are you a relative?" "No," Grant replied, his mind racing, "I'm her employer." There was another moment of silence. "I see," she said, the words heavy with something unspoken. "She has no family listed. You're the only contact we have." Grant stood motionless by the window, gazing down at the city below. Emma had been his right hand, his confidant in the business world. But it dawned on him with a jolt that he knew almost nothing about her personal life. How could he? She never mentioned anything beyond work, always keeping her private life strictly separate. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Grant said quickly, ending the call. The sterile scent of antiseptic greeted him as he entered the hospital, the air thick with the weight of uncertainty. His $3,000 suit and Italian leather shoes felt almost out of place in the stark hospital environment. He hadn't called for his driver, something about this felt too personal, too urgent to go through the usual formalities. At the nurse's station, a woman in scrubs looked up. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm Nurse Rodriguez. Thank you for coming so promptly." She led him to a small, dimly lit room where Emma lay, unmoving under the harsh, fluorescent lights. Her normally chestnut hair, carefully styled for work, was splayed across the pillow, her face starkly pale against the white sheets. The steady beeping of machines filled the air, their sound unnervingly detached. She looked smaller than usual, more fragile, unlike the poised, efficient assistant he had come to rely on. His chest tightened as he stepped closer, but stayed at the doorway. "What's wrong with her?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. A doctor appeared at his side, her face grim. "Dr. Reeves," she introduced herself, shaking his hand quickly. "We're still trying to determine that. Initial tests show severe anemia and exhaustion," she continued. "There's also significant weight loss over a short period." "Has she been under unusual stress lately?" Grant almost scoffed at the question. The Mitchell-Harrington merger had been consuming his every waking moment for months, and Emma had been at the heart of it. Everyone was under stress, but Emma, he suddenly remembered how tired she'd seemed recently, how her once impeccably fitted suits had started to hang off her more loosely. He hadn't noticed until now, and that realization gnawed at him. "The merger," he said quietly, his mind catching up. "But this seems extreme." Dr. Reeves studied him closely. "We're running more tests. There's a possibility this is more than just exhaustion. Does Ms. Caldwell have any pre-existing medical conditions that you're aware of?" Grant felt a wave of frustration. "I don't know," he admitted, the words stinging more than he expected. He was a man who prided himself on knowing everything, from business details to personal habits of everyone in his team. But when it came to Emma, he knew so little. Dr. Reeves looked at him with a sympathetic gaze. "Mr. Mitchell," she said gently, "perhaps you could check her apartment for any medical information or medications that might help us." He paused. "I don't have keys to her apartment," he said sharply, the frustration clear in his voice. "I'm just her boss." The silence that followed felt heavy, filled with unspoken truths. He approached Emma's bedside, looking down at her still form. Despite working side by side for 2 years, she was, in many ways, a stranger to him. She knew everything about him, his preferences, his schedule, even how he took his coffee, but what did he know about her? "Sir," Dr. Reeves interrupted his thoughts. "We found something concerning in her initial blood work. We're doing more tests, but there are markers that suggest a potentially serious condition. It would be helpful to know her medical history." Grant's mind raced. His HR department would have basic information on file, but it was unlikely to include much beyond the most essential details. He quickly pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found the number he needed. "Thomas," he said when his head of security answered. "I need you to get something for me, right away." He explained the situation, his tone urgent. When the call ended, he relayed the plan to Dr. Reeves. "My team will get you her medical records from HR." As the first light of dawn began to filter through the hospital's windows, Grant sat still by Emma's bedside, having already sent a brief email to the board, canceling his morning meetings. Emma remained unconscious, though the doctors now had more data from the records his team had retrieved. Dr. Reeves approached, her expression grim. "Mr. Mitchell," she began, "we have the results." "It's not good news." Grant straightened, anxiety clawing at him. "Tell me." "Ms. Caldwell has a rare form of leukemia," Dr. Reeves said, her voice steady. "It appears she was diagnosed 6 months ago and has been undergoing treatment. But recently, she stopped." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. 6 months. Emma had been silently fighting cancer, all while managing the most demanding job in his company. And he had never known. Why did she stop treatment, he asked, more to himself than to the doctor. Dr. Reeves hesitated before answering. Patients sometimes make these decisions for many reasons. Side effects, financial concerns, or sometimes, they just lose hope. Grant's mind struggled to grasp the enormity of it all. Emma had been carrying the weight of this illness alone, and he hadn't even noticed. What had she been going through? Why hadn't she said anything? The weight of the words hung in the air like an echo, reverberating through Grant Mitchell's mind. Mitchell Enterprises offered the best health insurance, yet experimental treatments often came with exclusions. And Emma had been fighting an invisible battle, one she never mentioned. Alone, with no family to lean on, she had kept this hidden while maintaining the flawless professionalism that made her indispensable to him. As Grant stood there, watching her still form, a feeling crept over him, something unfamiliar, something that made his chest tighten. It was helplessness, a sensation he had never had to deal with before. But there was something even deeper, more unsettling, the feeling of personal failure. His phone buzzed incessantly with updates about the merger, about the board meeting he should have been at, and yet for the first time in his career, those things seemed trivial. The board could wait. His mind wasn't on business anymore. It was on Emma, and the mystery that had emerged in the middle of all this chaos. Why, of all people, had he been her only emergency contact? And what had she been hiding beneath that professional, ever-efficient mask? The first light of dawn filtered through the blinds, casting a soft glow over Emma's face. He couldn't reconcile this image with the dynamic, ever-moving figure he knew so well in the office. Emma was always typing furiously, making quick decisions, and handling even the most chaotic days with grace. But now, she looked fragile, vulnerable. It was disorienting. Nurse Rodriguez had explained that they were keeping Emma sedated while they stabilized her and planned her next course of treatment. Grant's phone buzzed again, this time with a message from Diane Harrington, CEO of Harrington Industries, the company they were merging with. He silenced the phone without responding. The merger could wait. Emma could not. Without a second thought, he dialed Caroline, his vice president of operations. "I need you to handle the board meeting for me," Grant told her. "Family emergency." The words felt strange on his tongue, he had never used that excuse before. Caroline's surprise was palpable through the phone. "Is everything okay with your parents? Your sister?" "It's not my family," he replied curtly, though the words stung as they left his mouth. "I'll explain later. Just tell the board I'll reschedule." With that, he ended the call and made his way to the nurse's station. "I'd like to speak with Ms. Caldwell's oncologist," he said firmly. An hour later, Dr. Samuel Warner, a man with salt and pepper hair and tired eyes, arrived. They sat in a small consultation room where Grant received the brutal details of Emma's condition. "Acute myeloid leukemia," Dr. Warner said, his voice flat. "It's an aggressive form of cancer." Grant absorbed the words, but they didn't sink in right away. He was too focused on the details that followed. The clinical trial showed initial promise. Her cancer was responding, the doctor continued. But then she withdrew. No explanation. Grant's mind raced. Why? If it was working, why would she stop? He asked urgently. Dr. Warner sighed, rubbing his forehead. She said she couldn't continue, but she didn't elaborate. I suspected financial concerns, though she denied it. Grant's stomach churned. The trial had covered the experimental treatment, but it hadn't covered all the costs. Even with insurance, cancer was a financial burden that could break anyone, especially someone like Emma who had no family to help shoulder the load. Working through her treatment had been an enormous strain, but she had never once asked for time off, never once showed weakness. Grant's mind flew back over the last few months. Had there been signs he'd missed? Emma had occasionally taken afternoons off, claiming appointments. She'd called them doctor visits, always making up the hours later. She'd become thinner, but he had chalked it up to stress. She'd switched from coffee to tea, he assumed it was just a health kick. All of these little changes, ones he had barely noticed at the time, now formed a devastating pattern. What are her options now? Grant asked, his voice hoarse. Dr. Warner's expression was grave. Her condition has deteriorated significantly since stopping treatment. She needs to restart immediately, possibly with a more aggressive approach. There's another trial at Sloan Kettering that might be appropriate. Grant's jaw clenched. Cost isn't an issue. Whatever she needs, I'll cover it. Dr. Warner looked at him, his gaze curious. May I ask your relationship with Ms. Caldwell? You're her employer, correct? Grant shifted uncomfortably. Yes. She's my executive assistant. Dr. Warner raised an eyebrow. His tone suggested a subtle disbelief at the depth of Grant's concern. Well, first we need to stabilize her and see if she's still eligible for advanced treatments. Of course, these will be her decisions to make when she regains consciousness. After Dr. Warner left, Grant sat there in stunned silence. Business problems he could tackle with strategy and quick decision-making. This, however, was a world he wasn't prepared for. It wasn't something that could be fixed with a meeting or a spreadsheet. He picked up his phone again, dialing Thomas. I need more information on Emma Caldwell, he said, his voice low. Her personal history, family background, financial situation, everything. I also need access to her apartment. He hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of what he was asking. I know it's personal, but it's urgent. We need to find out everything we can. 3 hours later, Grant stood outside Emma's modest apartment building in Brooklyn. It was a far cry from the luxury high-rise where he lived in Manhattan. This was a quiet, nondescript building in a less glamorous part of the city. Thomas had arranged for the superintendent to give him a key after explaining the medical emergency. Emma's one-bedroom apartment was small but tidy, decorated with second-hand furniture and a few carefully selected art prints. The bookshelf along one wall was filled with a mix of classic novels and contemporary fiction. Grant paused in the doorway, taking it all in. He had no idea what to expect, but as he walked further into the apartment, it was clear that Emma had lived simply, quietly, far removed from the high-pressure world of Mitchell Enterprises. As he scanned the room, the realization hit him: he had never really known her at all. The desk in the corner was cluttered with a laptop and a stack of medical bills, partially concealed by a folder. The kitchen was sparse, the refrigerator almost bare, containing only some yogurt and wilted vegetables. Grant moved through the apartment cautiously, feeling like an intruder in a space that had never been meant for him to see. This was Emma's world, a private world, one she had never once shared at work. There were no family photos to be found anywhere, nothing that suggested she had anyone to turn to in times of need, which only confirmed what her emergency contact status had implied: she was alone. The only sign of life was a small collection of potted plants on the windowsill, now withered from neglect. Grant watered the plants, then moved to the desk. Inside the folder were medical bills, insurance claim forms, and correspondence regarding the clinical trial Emma had been involved in. Some bills were marked as overdue, while others showed payment plans with small monthly installments. A quick calculation in his head revealed a painful reality: despite Mitchell Enterprises' excellent insurance coverage, Emma's out-of-pocket expenses were substantial, and the unpaid time off for treatments would have severely impacted her salary. His phone buzzed with a message from Thomas: "Background info ready. Sensitive material. Call when private." Grant sat down on Emma's modest sofa and dialed the number. What Thomas revealed in the next 20 minutes changed everything he thought he knew about Emma. Emma had grown up in foster care after losing both parents in a car accident when she was 8. There were no siblings, no extended family to step in. She had put herself through college, relying on scholarships and student loans, graduating with honors from Penn State. Before joining Mitchell Enterprises, Emma had worked at 3 other companies, each time advancing steadily. Despite her modest income and student loans, her credit score was excellent. No criminal record, not even a parking ticket. But there was more. She volunteers at a literacy program for foster kids every other Saturday. Been doing it for 5 years, Thomas added. Grant leaned back, reflecting on the past 2 years. How many weekends had he demanded Emma's time? How many personal commitments had she rescheduled without a word of complaint to accommodate his needs? How many of those commitments had been volunteer work? And how many had been medical treatments? One more thing from Thomas. Her lease is up for renewal next month. There's an eviction warning for late payment. Last month's rent was due 3 days ago. Grant ended the call and sat in the growing darkness of Emma's apartment, absorbing the new information. The woman he had relied on, the one who had managed his life and business with such grace and poise, was fighting cancer alone, facing eviction, and struggling financially, all while maintaining the perfect professional facade. He recalled a conversation from months ago after a particularly challenging meeting. He had asked her, almost offhandedly, "How do you stay so calm under pressure?" They had been alone in an elevator. Emma had answered with that slight smile she often wore. "Practice," she had said. "When you've weathered real storms, office turbulence feels manageable." At the time, he had thought she was referring to past jobs. Now, her words took on a much deeper meaning. Grant's phone rang again. It was the hospital. Emma was awake. When Grant returned to the hospital, he found Emma sitting up in bed, looking pale but alert. Her eyes widened in surprise when she saw him. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, her voice rough from the breathing tube they had just removed. "You didn't need to come. I'm so sorry about the meeting." "Stop," Grant interrupted, astonished that her first concern was about work. "The meeting doesn't matter. Emma looked confused for a moment, then embarrassed as realization dawned on her. They called you? I never thought. The form asked for an emergency contact years ago, and I didn't have anyone else to list. I never updated it. Grant took a seat beside her bed, trying to keep his voice even. Why didn't you tell me you were sick, Emma? Emma stared down at her hands, her voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't relevant to my work performance. Not relevant? Grant's tone wavered with emotion. You've been fighting cancer alone for 6 months while working 60-hour weeks. You stopped treatment because of money issues. How is that not relevant? Her head snapped up, a flash of anger crossing her face. How did you? She cut herself off, eyes narrowing. I had to understand what was happening, Grant said, though there was no apology in his voice. You collapsed. The doctors needed information. Emma closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them, her usual professional mask was back in place. I appreciate your concern, Mr. Mitchell, but my personal matters are my own responsibility. I'll submit my resignation, she added, her voice firm. Grant stared at her, taken aback. Here she was, barely conscious after a medical emergency, and she was offering her resignation. He could feel the pride, the self-sufficiency, and the refusal to be seen as vulnerable. It reminded him so much of himself. Emma, he said quietly, his tone softer than it had ever been with her. Why am I your emergency contact? The real reason? The question hung in the air, raw and unanticipated. For a brief moment, her composure cracked. Because there's no one else, she whispered. There's never been anyone else. 3 days later, Grant sat in his home office overlooking Central Park, staring at a spreadsheet that had nothing to do with Mitchell Enterprises. It was a detailed analysis of Emma's medical options, treatment costs, and potential outcomes. He had approached her illness with the same precision he would any business problem: thorough research, strategic planning. His phone rang again. It was Diane Harrington, calling for the 5th time that day. Grant, she said when he finally answered. The board is getting nervous. We need to finalize this merger. What's going on? Grant rubbed his eyes, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on him. Personal matter, Diane. I need another week, he said, his voice strained. A week? Diane's voice rose in disbelief. The shareholders are waiting. The press had already begun speculating. This isn't like you, Diane had said. 1 week. Grant repeated, his voice unwavering. Caroline has everything under control, he added firmly before ending the call. The merger could wait. Emma's treatment, her well-being, was his focus now. His mind shifted back to his research. Since Emma's collapse, he had spent every moment digging into the reality of her situation. He had forced himself to confront uncomfortable truths about his company, his leadership, and most importantly, the woman who had kept his life in order while her own had been unraveling. His intercom buzzed. Mr. Mitchell, Thomas is here, his housekeeper's voice came through. Thomas entered, carrying a leather portfolio. I've completed the additional research you requested, sir. Grant took the file and opened it. Inside were reports on long-term cancer survival rates, medical leave policies at competing firms, and the most crucial piece of information, details about Mitchell Enterprises' own health insurance coverage. Is this accurate? Grant asked, pointing to a section highlighting coverage limitations for experimental treatments. Yes, sir. Our plan specifically excludes Phase 1 clinical trials, and caps coverage for Phase 2 at $50,000. Ms. Caldwell's treatment costs have far exceeded that amount. Grant clenched his jaw. And our medical leave policy? 12 weeks unpaid under FMLA, then termination if the employee cannot return to full duties. Standard corporate policy, Thomas replied. Grant's mind raced, the weight of the findings sinking in. And Emma never filed for medical leave? She used vacation days for her treatments, Thomas confirmed. Grant remembered approving those vacation requests, sometimes reluctantly, when they conflicted with critical meetings. Never once had Emma explained why those particular days had been needed. "Thank you, Thomas. That will be all," Grant said curtly, his mind already formulating the next steps. After Thomas left, Grant made a series of calls, one to his company's benefits administrator, another to his personal attorney, and finally, to the Mitchell Enterprises board secretary. By evening, he had a plan. The next morning, at Sloan Kettering, Grant found Emma sitting up in bed, her laptop open despite the doctor's orders to rest. She quickly closed it when she saw him enter. "Mr. Mitchell, you didn't need to visit again," Emma said, her voice raspier than usual, the professional tone still intact despite her hospital gown and the colorful scarf covering her hair loss. "Grant," he corrected gently, setting down the paper bag he carried. "After all this, I think we're beyond formalities." She looked uncomfortable but nodded. "Grant?" He gestured toward the laptop. "Working. Just emails. Helping Caroline transition," she said, avoiding his gaze. "I know I can't come back. My treatment schedule is too intensive. And the side effects." "Actually," Grant interrupted, "that's what I came to discuss." He pulled a chair closer to her bed. "I've been reviewing our company policies. They're inadequate." She looked confused. "I don't understand." "Our health insurance, our medical leave policy," Grant continued. "They're designed for healthy people who occasionally get sick, not someone facing a serious illness." He leaned forward. "Did you know that only 8% of companies offer paid medical leave beyond standard disability? And that cancer patients are twice as likely to face bankruptcy compared to those without cancer?" "Yes, I'm aware of the statistics," Emma said softly, and Grant realized with a pang of guilt that she had been living those very statistics. "Emma," he said, meeting her gaze. "I'm changing our company policies. Effective immediately, Mitchell Enterprises will offer comprehensive coverage for all clinical trials, a catastrophic illness fund to cover additional expenses, and extended paid medical leave for serious conditions." Her eyes widened. "That's generous. But the cost to the company?" "The cost is manageable," he interrupted confidently. "I've run the numbers. The impact on our bottom line will be minimal compared to the benefit for our employees." He paused. "These changes won't just help you, they'll help everyone at the company who might face similar circumstances." Emma studied him, trying to gauge his motivations. "Why are you doing this?" Grant hesitated for a moment. The answer had come to him in the middle of the night, stark and uncomfortable, because he had built a company that prioritized profit over people, efficiency over compassion. And Emma, brilliant, private, resilient Emma, had nearly died rather than ask for help or special treatment. "Because it's right," he said simply. "And because I've been wrong." He opened the paper bag and pulled out a container of homemade chicken soup. "My housekeeper's recipe. She insists it has healing properties." Emma accepted the container with a small smile, the first genuine one he'd seen since this ordeal began. "Thank you." As she ate, Grant broached the subject he had been avoiding. "The doctors tell me you're responding well to the new treatment, but recovery will take time." "Months, possibly a year," Emma said, setting down her spoon. "I know." Grant nodded. "That's why I've prepared a comprehensive transition plan for my replacement. Caroline already has the file. I've documented all my procedures, contacts, preferences, everything you'll need." Grant shook his head in disbelief, marveling at her efficiency, even in crisis. "I don't want to replace you," he said. "But you need an assistant who can." "What I need," he interrupted gently, "is for you to focus on getting well. I've hired a temporary assistant to handle day-to-day matters, but your position will be waiting when you're ready to return. Whether that's 3 months or a year from now." Emma's composure finally cracked. "You can't just keep my job open indefinitely," she said softly, her voice filled with disbelief. The company needs you, Grant said firmly. The company will manage. Right now, your job is to fight this disease. That's all. Tears filled her eyes, but she quickly looked away, blinking them back. I don't know how to accept this kind of help. Grant understood then. Her independence wasn't just pride, it had been a survival mechanism, built over years when no one had ever been there for her. She had learned to rely solely on herself. I know, he said quietly. Neither would I. Oh ChatGPT Ds. 2 weeks later, Grant sat at the Mitchell Enterprises boardroom table, facing his executive team and representatives from Harrington Industries. The merger talks were back on track, though the terms had been modified. What had caught everyone off guard was Grant's insistence on the newly proposed health and leave policies. He had made them non-negotiable, an unexpected move that surprised even his most loyal colleagues. The new employee benefits, the CFO was explaining, will increase operating costs by approximately 2% annually. However, early projections suggest these changes could reduce turnover and increase productivity, potentially offsetting much of the additional cost over time. Grant barely heard him. His mind was on Emma, who had been transferred to outpatient care just yesterday, despite her doctors advising against it. She had insisted on returning to her Brooklyn apartment instead of accepting his offer to stay in his guest house in Connecticut. Mr. Mitchell, the CFO's voice broke through his thoughts, do you have any comments before we vote? Grant glanced around the room at the expectant faces. These were the people who knew him as a shrewd businessman, someone who had built his empire by valuing shareholder interests above all else. The changes he was proposing ran counter to everything they thought they knew about him. He stood up, addressing the room. For 15 years, I've built this company on the principle that business success comes from strategic thinking and decisive action. I still believe that, but recent events have shown me that our most valuable assets are not our patents or market share, but our people. He thought of Emma, how she had given everything to her job while silently fighting a life-threatening illness. This isn't just about doing what's right, he continued, though that's a big part of it. It's about recognizing that our employees' well-being directly impacts our success. We ask for their loyalty and dedication. We should offer the same in return. The board voted unanimously to approve the new policies. After the meeting, Diane approached him privately. That was quite a speech, she said. Not what I expected from the Grant Mitchell I've known for a decade. What changed? Grant considered deflecting the question, but he found honesty was the only answer he could give. I discovered that someone I respect greatly was suffering right in front of me, and I never noticed. It made me question what else I've been missing. Diane studied him thoughtfully. This is about your assistant, isn't it? The emergency that took you away from negotiations? Emma, he corrected, his voice softening. That evening, instead of heading back to his penthouse, Grant found himself driving to Brooklyn. Emma had insisted she didn't need a checkup, but he couldn't shake the feeling that she was still hiding something from him. He had called ahead, and she was expecting him, though she'd made it clear she was fine. He parked outside her building, observing the neighborhood. It was vibrant and modest, worlds away from the sleek buildings and luxury streets he was used to. A small playground across the street, a corner bodega, and a diverse mix of residents gave the area a lived-in, community feel. When Emma opened the door, Grant was struck by how different she looked in jeans and a simple sweater, her head covered by a patterned scarf. She seemed more human now, less the professional powerhouse he'd known for years. You really didn't need to come all this way, she said, but stepped aside to let him in. I brought dinner, he replied, holding up a bag from a nearby restaurant. He had made sure to select healthy options, ones that would be gentle on her system. As they sat at her small kitchen table, eating together, Grant found himself sharing updates from the office, the merger progress, the challenges with his temporary assistant, the way she organized everything differently from Emma. The board approved the new policies today, he told her. They'll be implemented next month. That's wonderful, she said, her eyes lighting up. It will make such a difference for so many people. Grant watched her, captivated by the passion with which she spoke. There was something different about Emma here, in her own space, as she talked about the changes the new policies would bring. In the office, she was always the composed, efficient worker. Here, she was animated, engaged, and unguarded in a way he'd never seen before. "Why did you never tell me about your volunteer work with foster kids?" Grant asked, suddenly curious. Emma blinked, caught off guard by the question. "It didn't seem relevant to my job." "I want to know," Grant insisted. "Tell me about it." As Emma described her literacy program, her demeanor shifted completely. This was her passion, he realized. Helping children who faced the same kind of isolation she had endured growing up. "You could expand it," Grant said when she finished. "The Mitchell Foundation could provide funding, resources." "No," she replied firmly. "I appreciate the offer, but that program is separate from our work relationship. It's important to me to keep it that way." Grant was startled by her refusal, but found himself respecting it. She had built her life with clear boundaries, and he could understand that. She had created separate spaces where she maintained control over what mattered most to her. As he was leaving, Emma handed him a small plant in a ceramic pot, one of the plants he had watered on his first visit. "For your office," she said. "A reminder to water it weekly." The gesture touched him unexpectedly. It was both a thank you and a subtle reminder that living things needed care and attention, something he was only just beginning to understand. "Emma," he said, pausing at her door, "why did you really make me your emergency contact?" "The truth." She looked at him directly, her professional mask gone for the first time. "Because in 2 years of working together, you never once missed a meeting, never failed to follow through on a commitment. You're the most reliable person I've ever known," she said softly, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I never thought they'd actually call you, but if they did, I knew you'd answer." 6 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, Grant stood at the podium of a hotel ballroom addressing the annual Mitchell Enterprises Leadership Conference. The company had changed in significant ways since Emma's diagnosis. "It's not just the new health policies," Grant was saying, "but a broader shift in corporate culture. The merger with Harrington Industries has exceeded our financial projections for the 3rd consecutive quarter. But our most important metric isn't on your balance sheets." He paused, scanning the room filled with managers and department heads. "Employee retention has improved by 23%. Productivity is up. Workplace satisfaction scores have reached an all-time high. When people know they're valued, truly valued, they give their best. It's not complicated, but it took me too long to understand that." After the presentation, Grant checked his phone. No messages from Emma, which meant things were going as planned. Today marked her final treatment, a milestone they had both been anticipating. Though she remained on medical leave, their bond had deepened over the past months. They had developed a friendship that extended beyond their previous work relationship. Weekly dinners had become a ritual, sometimes at her apartment, sometimes at his penthouse. He had watched her fight her disease with the same quiet determination she had brought to everything in her life. Emma had taught him more about caring for people than he could have ever learned in a boardroom. Oh, ChatGPT Ds. 2 weeks later, Grant sat in the Mitchell Enterprises boardroom, surrounded by his executive team and representatives from Harrington Industries. The merger discussions were back on track, though the terms had been adjusted. What had caught everyone off guard was Grant's insistence on including the newly proposed health and leave policies as a non-negotiable condition. His sudden focus on employee well-being was unexpected. "These new employee benefits will increase operating costs by approximately 2% annually," the CFO explained. However, early projections suggest that the changes may reduce turnover and increase productivity, potentially offsetting much of that cost over time. Grant barely heard him. His mind was still with Emma, who had been transferred to outpatient care just the day before, against medical advice. She had insisted on returning to her Brooklyn apartment rather than accepting his offer of his rarely used guest house in Connecticut. "Mr. Mitchell," the CFO's voice broke into his thoughts. Do you have any comments before we vote? Grant looked around the table, meeting the expectant eyes of his colleagues. These were the people who had always known him as a ruthless businessman, one who valued shareholder interests above all else. The changes he was proposing were in direct contrast to what they had come to expect from him. He stood and addressed the room. For 15 years, I've built this company on the belief that success comes from strategic thinking and decisive action. I still believe that, but recent events have shown me that our most valuable assets are not our patents or market share. They are our people. He thought about Emma, the way she had given everything to her job while silently battling cancer. This isn't just about doing what's right, though it is that. It's about recognizing that our employees' well-being directly impacts our success. We ask for their loyalty and dedication. We should offer the same in return. The board voted unanimously to approve the new policies. After the meeting, Diane approached him privately. "That was quite a speech," she said. "Not what I expected from the Grant Mitchell I've known for a decade." What changed? Grant considered deflecting, but found honesty to be the only answer. "I discovered that someone I respect greatly was suffering right in front of me, and I never noticed. It made me question what else I've been missing." Diane studied him thoughtfully. "This is about your assistant, isn't it? The emergency that took you away from negotiations?" "Emma," he corrected softly. Later that afternoon, Grant drove to Sloan Kettering just as Emma was finishing her final treatment. She emerged from the treatment room looking tired, but with a sense of quiet triumph, holding a small bell in her hand. "They let me keep it," she explained, showing him the bell that patients traditionally ring after their last session for good luck. "How does it feel?" Grant asked, walking slowly alongside her toward the exit. "Surreal," she admitted. "After so long fighting this, it's strange to think about what comes next." In the car, Emma was quieter than usual. Grant had expected celebration, but she seemed pensive, almost melancholic. "Is everything all right?" he asked, crossing the Brooklyn Bridge. "Just thinking about tomorrow," she said, staring out the window at the city. "About coming back to work." "There's no rush," Grant reminded her. "Your doctor recommended at least another month of recovery." "I know," she replied. "But I'm ready to reclaim my life, to get back to normal." Grant wasn't so sure about normal. Their relationship had shifted beyond that of just employer and employee, it had become something undefined, something that felt impossible to return to. The professional dynamic they had shared now seemed far too distant. "Actually," Grant began, his voice steady, "there's something I want to discuss before you come back." He had planned to wait until dinner, but her words made him reconsider. "I've been thinking about restructuring your position." Emma turned to him sharply. "Restructuring?" "I'd like to promote you to Director of Executive Operations," he continued. "You'd oversee the executive office staff, including my new assistant, and take on more strategic projects. The role would offer more flexibility than your previous position, better compensation, and—" "Stop," Emma interrupted, her voice sharp in a way he'd rarely heard. "This is because of my illness, isn't it? You're creating a position that requires less of me because you don't think I can handle my old job." Grant was taken aback. "That's not. I don't want special treatment," she continued, her tone unwavering. "I've worked too hard to be seen as capable and reliable. I don't need to be protected or sheltered." "This isn't about protection," Grant insisted. "It's about recognizing your value. You've always been more than an assistant, Emma. You understand this company, its people, and its potential in ways I'm only beginning to see." She didn't look convinced. "Then why now? Why not before I got sick?" The question hung in the air, forcing Grant to confront an uncomfortable truth. "Because I didn't see you clearly before," he admitted. "I saw a function, not a person. I was wrong." The car pulled up outside a restaurant, not the neighborhood place they usually visited in Brooklyn, but an elegant Manhattan establishment overlooking the park. "This isn't my apartment," Emma observed. No, Grant agreed. I thought we should celebrate your milestone somewhere special. He hesitated. But if you'd rather go home, we can change plans. Emma studied him for a moment before shaking her head. No, this is fine. Just unexpected. Inside, they were led to a private dining room. As they entered, Emma stopped short, her hand flying to her mouth. The room was filled with 24 people, her volunteer literacy program staff, several of her older students, doctors and nurses from her treatment team, and key members of Mitchell Enterprises who had helped implement the new health policies. What is this? She whispered. A celebration, Grant said simply. For finishing treatment, yes, but also for everything you've accomplished and everyone you've helped along the way. For once, Emma seemed speechless. A teenage girl approached her, one of her literacy program students, now a volunteer herself. Ms. Caldwell, the girl said earnestly. We missed you so much. The program hasn't been the same without you. One by one, people came forward to embrace Emma, to share stories, and express their gratitude. Grant watched from a distance, seeing her through others' eyes, as a mentor, a friend, a source of quiet strength and practical help. Roles he had never known about during their years working side by side. As the dinner wound down, Dr. Warner approached Grant. This was a wonderful idea, the oncologist said. Celebrating milestones is important in recovery. How is she really doing? Grant looked at him quietly. Her latest tests show no detectable cancer, but with her type of leukemia, we'll need to monitor her closely for at least 5 years. The chances of recurrence are low with continued monitoring and care. Her prognosis is good, but nothing is certain with cancer. Dr. Warner studied Grant carefully. She'll need a strong support system moving forward. Grant nodded. She has one now. Later, as guests began departing, Emma found Grant standing by the windows overlooking the park. How you arranged all this, she said, her voice a mix of awe and gratitude. It wasn't just me, he admitted. Caroline is surprisingly good at secret planning. Emma shook her head in wonder. I never expected any of this. She gestured to encompass the entire evening, everything that had happened since her collapse. Thank you doesn't seem adequate. It's not necessary, Grant replied. But there was something else he wanted to discuss. The real reason for the promotion offer. He led her to a quiet corner and handed her a folder. Inside were details of the newly expanded Mitchell Foundation, including its first major initiative, a comprehensive support program for foster children transitioning to adulthood, offering educational scholarships, housing assistance, and mentorship opportunities. The foundation needs a director, Grant explained. Someone who understands both the business aspects and the human need. Someone with personal experience and professional skills. He met her gaze directly. I want you to consider taking the position. Emma stared at the proposal, clearly stunned. This is substantial funding. $10 million initially, with a commitment for ongoing support, Grant confirmed. Complete operational independence. The foundation will have its own board, its own staff, its own offices. Are you serious? Her voice held a mixture of disbelief and cautious hope. Completely, Grant said. You once told me that helping those kids was your passion. Now you can do it on a scale that will make a real difference. Build something lasting. Emma was silent for a long moment, processing the opportunity before her. Why? She finally asked. Why would you do this? Grant had asked himself the same question many times over the past months. The answer had evolved from guilt to respect to something deeper. Because some investments have nothing to do with money, he said quietly. Some investments are about making the right choice, for the right reasons. I've built a successful company, Grant said, his voice steady but filled with a quiet conviction, but you've shown me that true value isn't measured in profit margins. It's measured in lives changed, in potential realized. He touched the small potted plant Emma had given him, now thriving in his office, a daily reminder of what required care and attention. I've learned that some things matter more than quarterly reports. You taught me that, Emma. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears as she absorbed his words, and Grant could see the conflict behind her composed exterior. She took a deep breath, finally speaking. I need time to think about this. Of course, Grant replied, understanding the weight of her decision. Take all the time you need. The opportunity isn't going anywhere. 3 weeks later, Grant found himself standing in the newly leased offices of the Mitchell Foundation for Youth Advancement. The space was still mostly empty, save for a few pieces of furniture and stacks of moving boxes. But the large windows offered a breathtaking view of the city, a symbol of the foundation's potential to grow and make a real impact. Emma walked through the door, her professional demeanor firmly in place, though her hair had grown back, cropped short around her face. The illness had altered her physically, but there was a new confidence in her posture, one that came not from her role as his assistant, but from within herself. Well? Grant asked, gesturing to the space. Will it work? Emma nodded, a smile breaking through her otherwise composed facade. It's perfect, she said, her eyes scanning the room. The location is accessible for the kids, and there's room to grow. She turned to take in the view. It feels like a fresh start. Then it's yours, Grant said, handing her the keys. Director Caldwell. Emma took the keys with a small laugh. I'm still getting used to that title. You'll grow into it, Grant assured her. You already have the most important qualification. You care deeply about the mission. They walked through the empty rooms together, discussing plans for the space and the programs Emma wanted to implement. Her excitement was palpable as she described her vision for supporting foster youth through education, housing, and emotional support. We'll need to hire staff, she said, listing out the steps. Starting with a program coordinator. And Emma, Grant interrupted gently. Slow down. You don't need to figure everything out today. She stopped, taking a deep breath. You're right. It's just. I've dreamed of doing something like this for so long. Now that it's actually happening, I want to make sure I do it right. You will, he said confidently. And you're not doing it alone. They ended up on a bench in a small park near the new office building. The late autumn sunshine was warm, despite the cool air, and Emma turned her face up to it gratefully. Sometimes I still can't believe I'm here, she admitted, her voice soft. A year ago, I was hiding my diagnosis, worried about losing my job, afraid of what would happen if I couldn't work. Now you're running a multi-million-dollar foundation, Grant finished for her. Life takes unexpected turns, Emma said, turning to look at him directly. The most unexpected part is us. Whatever us is. It was the first time either of them had directly addressed the evolution of their relationship. Grant had been careful not to press, always aware of the power imbalance that had existed between them. But now, things were different. Emma was no longer his employee. She answered to her own board, and her future was in her hands. What do you want us to be? Grant asked quietly. Emma considered the question seriously. I'm not entirely sure, she replied after a moment. But I know I don't want to go back to being just your assistant. And I don't think I can be just your friend either. No, Grant agreed. That ship has sailed. I need you to understand something, Emma continued, her voice steady. I've spent my entire life being self-sufficient, never depending on anyone. That won't change overnight. I'm grateful for everything you've done, but I need to stand on my own. I would never want to change that about you, Grant said, his tone softening. Your independence is part of who you are. She smiled, relaxing slightly. So where does that leave us? Grant thought about the past year, how his priorities had shifted, how his understanding of success had transformed, all because an emergency call had forced him to see the woman who had been right in front of him all along. At the beginning, he suggested, equal partners in whatever comes next. Emma considered his words, then nodded slowly. I think I'd like that. She held out her hand formally, her eyes twinkling with unexpected humor. Grant Mitchell, would you like to have dinner with me tonight? My treat this time. Grant took her hand, but instead of shaking it, he held it gently between both of his. Emma Caldwell, I would be honored. As they walked through the park together, Grant realized that the merger, the company, the foundation, everything he had worked for, paled in comparison to this simple moment of connection. The billionaire boss and his executive assistant had traveled a long, unexpected road to reach this point, from emergency contact to something much more meaningful. A partnership neither of them had sought, but both now treasured. And as Emma lightly bumped his shoulder with hers, laughing at something he said, Grant knew with certainty that sometimes the most important calls were the ones you never expected to receive.